Hey, how you doing, econ students? This is Mr. Clifford. Welcome to Krugman's Economics for AP. All right, it's time for section 13 that's going to talk about the factor market. Now let's go back to that concept of the circular flow that you learned back in the beginning of class. There's the product market where goods and services are sold. There's also factor markets where resources are sold. So we're talking about the market for land, labor, and capital. The most important concept that you're going to learn is the idea of derived demand. The demand for resources is determined by the products they produce. So if the demand increases for a product like, let's say, cars, that's going to increase the demand for resources to produce cars, like the workers, the machines, the steel, things like that. And again, the whole idea of supply and demand is at play here. But now the firms are the ones that are demanding, and the individuals are the ones who are supplying labor. But how does a firm determine the demand for workers? Well, the answer is something called MRP. The marginal revenue product. The marginal revenue product is the additional revenue earned from a factor of production. So it's the additional revenue you get from hiring another worker. A firm compares that to the marginal resource cost, or the additional cost of hiring that worker. As long as the marginal revenue product is greater than marginal resource cost, firms should hire those workers. Now this concept is just like the profit maximizing rule that you learned before when we were talking about firms producing stuff. Now it's just talking about firms hiring workers. And this idea of comparing the marginal revenue product to the marginal resource cost applies to all different factors. So it applies to labor, land, and capital. You'll learn about land and capital in Module 70 and labor in Module 71.
Whoa, caution here. Listen, I've been using these two terms, marginal factor cost and marginal resource cost. That's because resources are factors. It's the same thing, right? So resources, factors, inputs are all the things used to produce other things.
And one of the most important concepts you definitely need to learn is the idea of the market supply and demand for labor. So in this graph right here, we have a firm on the left that has a horizontal marginal factor cost, or the marginal resource cost. And it's set by the supply and demand of the market. And workers have to work for that wage or else they won't get a job. And there's also the concept of a monopsony. That's when there's only one firm hiring a specific type of labor. The graph looks like this. Now, obviously, I'm glossing over some of the details, but there's great videos in the module. And in Module 72, you're going to learn about the cost minimizing rule, which is the equation right here. Now, you actually learned and practiced a similar concept when you learned about the utility maximizing rule. If you want to minimize your cost, you want to do so by figuring out the additional output produced by, let's say, a worker divided by the cost of that worker, in this case, the wage. And you're going to compare that to the additional output produced by a different resource, capital, divided by the price of capital. Now, if you get more output per dollar spent by hiring workers, then go ahead and hire workers. Now, if that falls below the output per dollar spent for capital, then you should switch over and start hiring capital instead. The point is, if you want to minimize your costs, you got to make sure you look at the additional output produced divided by the price of that resource. Now, it turns out that this is one of the shortest units, and so some students think it's not important, but it is. They ask these questions a lot in the AP test, okay? Make sure you practice hiring workers and using the profit maximizing rule for hiring resources. Always hire where MRP equals MRC, okay? Till next time.